I think we'll start now. So, on behalf of the Zion Mental Health Ministry team, I want to welcome everybody here for a reading that actually, whether Marcia knows it or not, we've been looking forward to for about 6 or 8 months. So we're very excited to have you here today, Marcia. And my thanks to Marcia Murphy. I think you all know that Marcia is a writer. She is an advocate for persons with mental illness. Marcia shared a little bit about her early past, her youth. As a young adult, she was a tennis instructor. I could have used her services then. In her 20s, she became disabled related to mental illness. She has had a variety of positions in our community, both paid and as a volunteer. For 12 years, she served as a statistician at the UIHC Patients Library. She's done presentations for the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics nursing staff, presentations for the medical students at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. She's the author of numerous books, articles, essays. I think one of the things that I was really impressed by was the number of voices with which she can write, both as essays, sort of what I would describe as philosophical discursions, creative nonfiction. It really is a variety of work and a variety of voices in which she writes. And she celebrates this as truly a gift from God. And I agree and give thanks and gratitude. So today, Marcia's going to be reading from this book. It's a beautiful cover. The collected writings of Marcia A. Murphy. I read it in one sitting, and it had a very powerful impact on me. So I highly recommend it. The sort of subtitle is Christus Magnus Medicus Sanit. And for you Latin scholars in the world, you'll know that that means Christ, the great physician, heals. So Marcia, thank you. Marcia, I think we'll go on mute so we don't interrupt you, but Marcia's going to read. We talked about maybe a half hour-ish or however long it goes-ish, and then time for discussion, questions, engagement. So without further ado, Marcia, the floor, or whatever you call it in Zoom world, is yours.
Well, thank you, Zion Lutheran Church, for inviting me and hosting this. And I'll start with an essay called Reflections. This essay opens with a quote I got from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from his letter from the Birmingham jail. He said, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. I have a mental illness, and the reason I quote Martin Luther King Jr. is because the mentally ill have a lot in common with the African American population. Not only have we faced rejection and discrimination, we are also among the most incarcerated compared to the general population and who are more likely to live at the subsistence level. I will not attempt to go into full depth of what the Blacks have experienced here. I could not do it justice. I will just begin this essay by saying that the reader should be mindful the mental illness has as a stigmatized illness much in common with the people of other marginalized groups. And because of this, we can learn from others how to cope, organize, and move forward. Too many white church-going middle-class Americans are satisfied with the status quo, content to focus on everyday needs of family and friends. Few concern themselves with problems of the oppressed, in this case the mentally ill, unless of course it strikes close to home. Many saturate themselves with entertainments, escapism, and diversions with which to be inoculated from the very real pain of the afflicted. But the God of the Bible and the example of Jesus Christ shows that God is deeply concerned for the afflicted, oppressed, poor, and outcast. So it follows that God's people will reflect this biblical God of justice in showing compassion for the poor, sick, and downtrodden. God's people stand up for justice. The Christian church will reflect this merciful God in attitudes and actions. The God of the Bible is not concerned with acquiring wealth or fine palaces. The authentic Christian church will keep its focus not on riches and external appearances, but on the deep inner values of caring for others and helping those in need. You might say that the mentally ill and others similarly afflicted represent a challenge and a litmus test for the Christian community, which will reveal who are truly God's people and who are the imposters. I have prayed for my mentally ill friends. I have asked God now to extend his grace as never before in history. Jesus, who is the judge and yet the defender, must come to our aid. We all need the grace of God. Reinhold Niebuhr, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, spoke of the great modern pessimism in perspectives on the state of humanity. A summary of his thought pertaining to this is that he expressed the futility in trying to excuse the vast depravity within man. Yet he also said that man has a great capacity for justice, and it is the duty of a people to work for change and to not give up hope. Niebuhr is a man who witnessed both the First and Second World Wars during his lifetime, whereby prohibiting him from any trace of naivete. Yet when someone expressed a futility in attempting to improve the human condition, he still encouraged action and positive thought in the cause of justice. As a Christian theologian and philosopher, his point was that even in the face of evil, humans must work for good and never give up hope. I personally would challenge anyone who states that things never improve. History has proven this otherwise, as we see in women's suffrage, civil rights, and even medical care. For too long, the mentally ill have suffered in silence. I came upon the following quote by Simone Weil. "The afflicted are not listened to. They are like someone whose tongue has been cut out and who occasionally forgets the fact. When they move their lips, no ear perceives any sound, and they themselves soon sink into impotence in the use of language because of the certainty of not being heard." From the mid-1800s to the 1950s, American mental institutions were houses of horror. Though many attempted to help the ill, treatments were few or non-existent. The mentally ill were warehoused. Many were abandoned. Now, in the present day, I see that there are some people at the church I attend who would like to help with this cause. I hope that other churches across the country will also take steps to aid the mentally ill in their communities. Again, I pray for the grace of God to extend to all that suffer from the affliction of mental illness, and that healing will result in furthering the integration of this population into our Christian worship and fellowship. Okay, the next piece I'm going to read is called Letter to My Therapist. And first I read my letter to the therapist, and then I have my own therapist answered, and I didn't change any of his wording. I kept everything he said. This was originally written in 2013. So I'll read that for you. Dear therapist, I write this letter because there have been recent criticisms regarding my depressed state to the point of being verbally chastised for my recent suicidal gestures that took me to the emergency room of our university hospital. not condemnation coming from yourself, but a harsh rebuke by an MD. Your position as a psychologist may give you a more insightful perspective and hopefully a more compassionate frame of mind than what I've previously encountered from your insensitive colleague. As a person with mental illness having the diagnosis of schizophrenia, I've come face to face with rejection from our society, being treated as someone inferior, deviant, and unworthy of respect has caused an internalization of these pejoratives that has left me with little or nothing to base a positive sense of self on. For example, the government's view is to let the mentally ill starve to death, which is made evident by the scant monetary benefits provided for me and my fellow disabled friends. Along with that, affordable housing is almost non-existent. Not only am I constantly mindful of possible homelessness and death by exposure, when I do find housing, it is most certainly substandard. Apartments filled with bugs, air conditioners periodically on the blink, violent, dangerous, and predatory neighbors. Our governor would rather put the mentally ill in prison than give them the psychiatric services they need to get well. He has cut essential programs and terminated residential care facilities, which will end in certain death for some of the clients. In a way, this is government-sanctioned murder reminiscent of the Actian T4 program of Nazi Germany, where all the undesirables and those with no economic value were exterminated. We just have another name for it now: budget cuts. Oh, the money is there. The state had a surplus this year, 2013, and yet the governor has the gall to cut important funding, which would help the most vulnerable and needy of our society. Then he goes on to say that what he wants our state to be is #1 in health. Now I ask you, how can a population be healthy without their mental health? That comes first. So you would ask, what have I been depressed about? Why would I want to end my life? Don't I have anything to live for? Be joyful, my pastor recently demanded during a church service, then proceeded to lead us in the Christmas song, Joy to the World, in February. I'm tired of the way people treat the mentally ill who not only live in poverty and severe deprivation, but social ostracization, often being denied medical and dental care, shunned by neighbors, social groups, and relatives, gossiped about behind our backs by coworkers, being openly mocked and ridiculed by those same coworkers, denied service in restaurants, and feared by many. Too long have I wondered where my next meal will come from, starting at the middle of each month, trying to find a way to a food bank. Too long have I tried to get rides to church, begging members to help me out each and every week. Too long have I suffered the isolation of an outcast, weekends and nights alone, angry at God and humanity. Why not just walk over to my dresser top and take the prescription bottle, take it to my table by the chair, counting the tablets? Yes, there would be enough. Pour a glass of water, sit down. It's just one arm motion away, escaping into the deep darkness, perhaps an end to pain. But what if I don't succeed? Need I keep my apartment door unlocked to allow paramedics easy access? Will there be an odor? Most certainly after only a few hours. Who would find me? Maybe it's too gross. A dead body is not a pretty thing. It would be embarrassing. So let's put the cap back on. Let's put the bottle back on top of the dresser, perhaps until another day or night when I long for a companion, someone to talk to and to whom I can listen, as I longed last night and the night before and the one before that. Still, there is no one. Another night when my faith falters and my convictions are shattered. The Bible says that God will provide for all our needs, with the qualifier that we are seeking God's kingdom. I have tried to do this and still hunger. Where is the answer to God's promise? Some say it will come eventually, perhaps not in our lifetime. In other words, in the afterlife. So I might as well die. Heaven will be a place of loved ones and friends. So why not just do it? End my misery and find happiness and bliss? There must be a reason I keep putting the prescription bottle lid back on and carrying it back to the dresser. When in the coldest and blackest winter night, when all the demonic underworld surrounds me and beckons me to join them, there must have been a tiny wish in my heart to stay on this side of eternity for just a little longer. Maybe, just maybe, things will get better. And that God who seems so aloof now and to me evasive might one day make it radically clear that his purpose for me and my life will supersede and nullify the abundant desperation, hopelessness, and despair I have encountered for so many years. I will trust in this God again. Sincerely and with the highest regard, Marcia. And now the answer is from my therapist. Marcia, I just read your letter. Your question in the letter is one of hope. Where does one get hope in the face of injustice, loneliness, financial struggles, and emotional difficulties? I can only tell you where I have gotten hope in the toughest times in my own life. First, hope comes from connection to others. Even when we are lonely and isolated, it is possible and necessary to make contact with others. Even when the depth of contact is not all that we wish it were, it is contact. That is why service to others through volunteer activities or work, church or synagogue involvement, friendships, civic activities, clubs are so important and so sustaining. Hope comes from spiritual connections, by which I mean a sense that one is connected to other living beings throughout time and space. Those connections can be fostered by involvement in spiritual communities, books, teachers, communing with nature. There are many doorways into a spiritual life. We have to be willing and we have to have the strength and curiosity to open the doors and walk in. Last, for me, hope and determination come from my ancestors. I am Jewish. Hope and tenacity have sustained my own people for thousands of years. The best example I can think of is the Austrian Jewish psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. He was sent to Auschwitz during World War II. His wife died in another camp, but he did not know it until the end of the war that she had perished. Hope kept Frankl going. However, there's one thing that he did that inspires me in the darkest times. He was a doctor. In Auschwitz, there is a sick ward. At the end of the war, there was an outbreak of typhus in the camp. As the Germans were finally fleeing, with the Russian army about to liberate Auschwitz, Frankl considered fleeing the camp too. He was finally free. A patient with typhus asked Frankl if he was going to leave the camp, abandoning the sick prisoners to whatever fate they faced. Frankl decided that he was a doctor and that no matter what, he must stay and help his patients, putting off his own liberation from Auschwitz. That gives me hope no matter what. If Viktor Frankl could find hope in that situation, so can we. Regards, Dr. T. Yeah. Now I'm going to read just some small sections from my presentation for nursing staff given at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics in February of 2009.
She's really good. Yes.
The term disease can be thought of differently than the term of sickness. With sickness, healing is spiritual. The medical field has so focused on cure that it is forgetting that healing is spiritual. Spirituality can inspire hope. With hope, there is a possibility of change and a future. Possibility is for the self what oxygen is for breathing. And my last piece is called Dawn. And I had an instructor who was a part of the University Iowa Writers Workshop, and he was my tutor. He said, write about something that has inspired you. Once one has survived a near-death experience, everyday life is seen with a new perspective. My near-death experience occurred when I barely survived a suicide attempt back in my late 30s. Afterward, buried in a fog of doubt and confusion, I clawed my way into the light of life. Still, over a decade later, I experienced rebirth in numerous ways and on various occasions. Recently, my friend advised, go outside into the early morning, listen to the birds. What are they saying to you? So I went out. The morning, still dark from the cover of night, came alive with the delicate yet mighty chorus of birdsong. I walked about. A cardinal in a tree, one on a TV antenna. All around there were different kinds of birds, merging notes and melodies, seemingly joyous, yet with a hint of melancholy. It then occurred to me that birds were not only singing in my neighborhood, but they were doing so all over the city, the countryside, the state, and the region. In fact, they sang anywhere the sun was rising, as it did all over the world. Such a thought captivated me in wonder and awe. A neighbor opened her door, coffee in hand. Good morning, I called out. Good morning, she said. When one has had a close encounter with death, afterwards all that makes life worthwhile becomes more apparent. Now I don't take the singing of birds for granted, and I'll never forget one particular spring morning when the heavens poured down showers. I still heard one solitary bird somewhere out there in the rain. It sang, giving praise to its maker, undaunted, loyal. So I thought to myself, let this be a lesson for me, even while in the midst of life's storms. Sing.
Oh.
Glory to God. That's the end of the reading.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So I'm willing to have a discussion and answer questions if you have. There are times when only my faith kept me alive.
Yeah.
So I really I owe a lot to the Lord for helping me.
Has anything improved medically at our university, or how people are dealt with when they're in crisis?
Well, I know of some new treatments in the ER when a person is suicidal. They have some kind of drug that is like a nasal spray that is supposed to help with the mood, the depression. So that's just the newest thing I've heard of in the ER. But I would like to, I have a new writing project, and I kind of critique that and say we need to really go into depth to find why people are sad, and it takes time. And in medicine, it's very time oriented and quick, a fast pace. Mm-hmm. So there's not a whole lot of time for therapy sessions, and that's what people need. Mm-hmm. So I would push your lawmakers to provide funding so that the medical people can have the longer therapy sessions. Our medical people are doing an excellent job given the limited resources they have. And if we could just give more funding, then they can do more than just quick fixes. Well, they do the quick fix. Mm-hmm. So we need funding, and the lawmakers are responsible for that.
Marcia, in your opening piece in your book called Grand Rounds, which itself is very powerful. The idea that you're at the grand rounds and sort of being studied simultaneously with offering your thoughts. But there's a discussion, or your discussion, of recovery, which I think you use in sort of not in opposition to, but as an alternative way of thinking about where you are versus cure. Are you able to sort of share with us your thoughts about what it means what recovery means?
Okay. I've read a lot about that, and I would have to say that it's a process. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I have to clarify that I have not had problems with substance abuse. I've never abused alcohol or drugs, so I can't speak for that group. The most I did was drink a lot of Diet Pop, you know, and or maybe occasionally I would have a wine cooler, just experimenting. But I know that many mentally ill people with mental illness have substance abuse problems, cigarettes or whatever, and I can't speak for them. I don't know. The only thing I could say would be to have faith, to try to develop good habits. And my faith is more of a lifestyle, like we mentioned before. Recovery is more than just saying, well, I'm gonna go to church once a week. I have to have a very disciplined spiritual life. Every morning I get up and I have coffee and read my Bible. And I listen to Christian music during the day often, very often. I pray the first thing in the morning. And I've been doing this for over 20 years. And so it's something that really stabilizes me. There are times when I'm still in some kind of a depression, but I try to work my way out of it. So I think a very important factor is having social support from the Christian community. Many people with mental illness may not know how to behave in a group setting. So the Christian community will need to be very patient with people and try to help the person feel welcome. Just real simple acts of kindness would help. So recovery is both vertical, having a relationship with God, and horizontal, learning social skills. When I was a volunteer at the hospital, my supervisor, who also goes to St. Andrew, was very welcoming to people of all different abilities. And I learned social skills during the period of 12 years. I still am. I'm still learning social skills, but the volunteer work really helped with that. So there are many different areas of recovery. Like I mentioned, social skills, having support from friends, new friends, the spiritual discipline, how you live your life. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. You know, you've mentioned your connection to St. Andrews, and that appears in your writing. And among the things that you've described as people there being, I think, initially what you describe as accepting, showing respect, and then sort of affirming people's dignity. And you're giving us a little bit of an idea of what that looks like, but what does that look like to you, for example? What does that sort of radical acceptance and that sort of respect look like in your relationships to the people there? I mean, I'm asking it not idly, but rather as thinking about what we at Zion want to be, need to be in terms of our sort of dignity affirming stance to other people.
Well, not long ago, one of our members, Jeff Carice Carlson, did a program on Fred Rogers, right? And just the things that Mr. Rogers would teach on his children's show help everyone. Just be nice, be nice to people. Try not to judge too much, and forgive. There needs to be a lot of forgiveness because, you know, I've made mistakes. I think the church is also a place of discipline where people not only love you and value you, but they can give you some healthy discipline too. So you really learn how to act like a good person or like a good Christian. So it hasn't been perfect. I mean, there have been people that I thought were abusive or mistreated me. But Jesus says to pray for everyone, even your enemies. So, and to forgive. And I have a little neighbor in my neighborhood, and she forgives everybody right away. If somebody offends her, she says, "Oh, I forgive them," you know. And I try to be like her, you know. So what does it look like? I think in one of my essays in my book, I mentioned that when I first started getting involved in a church, I did volunteer work. I collated the newsletter. So if you have a new person with mental illness, try to give them a position, a volunteer position. If they like to work with the newsletters, like collating them with the mailings, help with the mailings. I help set up coffee and during a coffee time. Helping with the bulletins when there's a church service to hand out bulletins at the door to be a greeter. Yeah. So if a person with mental illness can have some kind of volunteer work to do in the church, that will get them started. So
another thing he said over and over, won't you be my neighbor?
Yeah.
Like your friend that had the coffee outside. I hope she waved and raised her coffee cup in a friendly salute.
Marcia?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's hard to talk about things that have been really hurtful in your life. So I really appreciate that. And I would like to know how you're doing lately and what kinds of things the church can do now during the pandemic that create community and social support.
That's a good question. I think for people like me, I live alone in an apartment, so I can be isolated sometimes. And I have some friends that will send emails, and I talk to people on the phone. And the church needs to reach out to people who are living alone, offer if they can help them in any way. My friend who visits me, we both wear a mask, and she'll stay for 15 or 20 minutes, and we sit across the room from each other. So we feel pretty safe that way. Something that has been an issue is transportation. And for a person who doesn't have a car, they're very limited. So sometimes friends will go to the store for me. I have a friend who went to Walmart and bought me yarn. I've taken up knitting. And she went and bought me some skeins of yarn and dropped them off. And sometimes people can drop things off outside my apartment door with my door closed, so there's no contact. other people have gotten me some groceries and left them there. I now order from Hy-Vee and have delivery. So friends can be creative, and if they want to drop something off or do texting or call on the phone, that would help.
Marsha, I just want to thank you for your courage and for the courage to put this into a book so it's available to people. I think it's really hard for cultures to learn, and whole communities of people to learn how to see things they are so accustomed to not seeing. And mental illness too often is in that category. We either are accustomed to not seeing it, or we're cultured to not pay attention. And it takes incredible courage for people to call us to, as a whole community, to better ways of living. And I'm grateful for that. I also need to offer a word of apology on behalf, I'm going to offer it on behalf of the bishop, who failed to check Zion's schedule before she scheduled a contradictory meeting that I also am required to be at today. So I'm glad to hear this is being recorded. I will have to catch the second part of the conversation later. I don't want you to think I'm leaving for any other reason. It would take quite a bit of a different reason for me to go, and the bishop's new, so I feel like I better not fail on the
That's
first.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
to catch this part of it. Thank you all for your work, especially those of you on the mental health team who have empowered these conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor. So one of the things that, and I sort of mentioned this before we started, Marshall, when you and I talked, that struck me about what you said. I think in the 21st century, we're very suspicious of faith healing, right? I'm going to be healed through faith. And I see these images of the guys on TV that put their hand out onto somebody, and I don't know if you've ever seen this kind of TV where they go boom, and it's magic and it goes away. And that sort of model of how we heal, what healing looks like, seems to me problematic. And that your description of religious discipline and religious life and where the healing comes from through this discipline of prayer, of meditation, through Bible reading, through service, and then your description of how that's affected your life. So much, I mean, that's a lesson we can all learn about healing and what healing looks like and can look like. Not this sort of magic moment, but rather this relationship to God and to the people around us, and to all living beings. It seems to me that's a deep insight. It's something that you return to at virtually every piece that you wrote. I wrote a note to myself, oh, that's interesting. It's not a religious magic moment she's describing. It's a relationship. It's an engagement in a life.
Okay.
Am I lecturing?
Yes, and it takes a lot of time, and like I said, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 back. So there will be dark days or sad days, and there will be days when you might feel very distant from God. And I think that's where the Christian community comes in, that connecting with people that will support our faith, the walk we have with Christ. Like the disciples said to Jesus in the Bible, when Jesus said, "Are you going to leave me too?" And they said, "We have nowhere else to go. You are the one. There's nowhere else to go except to be with you, with Jesus."
Ken, my name is Ken. I just was going to raise the one issue. One of the challenges of our committee is that we have identified is to help educate our congregation. And I just wondered if in your experience at St. Andrews, what ways in which you had found it useful to reach out to the congregation and perhaps to educate them in new ways of understanding the issues involved.
Well, I was very blessed at St. Andrew because some people were advocates for me just when they found out of my affliction. For a while, I was doing presentations for the adult ed program on Sundays. I maybe did 3 in about 5 years, maybe 3 programs. And I had a slideshow and I would show that I had an illness, and a lot of like what's in my books. I gave presentations on that. Also, I gave a short 5-minute talk during a sermon or service, worship service. Then I've had people work with me who are advocates for me. And one person got up in front of the church during a worship service and told about the program I have to raise funds for apparel for the psychiatric patients. And she talked a lot about our work that she's doing with me to help us get apparel for the university psychiatric patients. So it has a lot to do with talking to the people formally, as in presentations, and just getting to know people one-on-one. A lot of the people I got to know were because I needed transportation, and I got to know people when they gave me rides. So that's one thing. And again, the volunteer work is a way to get to know people and spread the word about what they need, what a person needs as a way, in a way of getting help. So.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi, Lisa.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, hi. My name is Lisa, and I'm a member of the group, and I also have a mental illness. I have bipolar disorder type 1. And I found your book very fascinating. John took my question earlier. So, but when you were answering it, I feel like I still had questions about the recovery part. If you don't feel comfortable answering this, please feel free to say that you don't. Would you say that you currently have schizophrenia or not?
Well, since that is such a derogatory diagnosis, I try to avoid it as much as I can. I use the word psychosis. I've had experience with psychosis. I go into more depth about spiritual aspects of mental illness in my books. So there's a spiritual component too. And the Western medical diagnosis of schizophrenia covers such a broad range. It's an umbrella word for many, many types of disorder.
Right.
So I really avoid using that word now. And I just say I've had experience with psychosis.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But in relation to what John was asking earlier about in recovery, because that's what the first section dealt with, I think that that's what I was wanting to ask about. If you felt like you were healed or in recovery, from psychosis or other mental illnesses?
Oh, okay, I understand. No, I'm in a process of recovery. It's a long process, and I still have some symptoms. Occasionally I get very dizzy, and other times I hear things. Sometimes I can still see things, like once I thought I saw a ghost just recently. So I still have some what the psychiatry would call symptoms.
Okay.
But I'm much more functional. I can function better now than 30 years ago. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a long process.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think in that section, you talk about purpose and direction as being sort of key to this, along with which I think you describe as a social reintegration, but that it isn't necessarily the elimination of all symptoms, which I think is an interesting sort of description of health, which is focused on functionality rather than some sort of abstract thing, right? I mean, how are you living in a purposeful direction oriented way?
Yes.
It seems to me writing is evidence of that, right? I mean,
yes, I'm kind of a goal-oriented person. I like to have projects. I don't like to just do nothing usually. So my work I've done has given me a purpose for life. And once in a while I still have symptoms. And sometimes they're stronger symptoms or less. But I feel I've made progress. I think I'm going forward. So I think I'm doing better now than I was 20 years ago.
Oh, sure.
That's fabulous.
As far as helping the church with mental illness, we know Lisa. Lisa's been very upfront and honest, but I'm sure there are other people like that. Marcia says we need to give rights to or show special friendliness. Lisa's good with hugs, touching. This is a bad time to hug with COVID. But Marcia mentioned phone calls. Other day I talked to a member about the library, and it felt so good. Both of us felt so good to be able just to visit and talk. So a thing that we don't know as a committee, but maybe each of you knows a number of other people, but I don't know other people that I can relate to or be aware that they could use a friendly help, an invitation to do a volunteer work or anything. I'm just not aware of anybody else. And I wondered if the committee or if the pastor, it's one of those kind of things that's private, but maybe they could get permission to let us help.
Yes, I agree. It's private. And the reason I got help with starting volunteer work at church was because I did get a Stephen minister also. And my Stephen minister kind of helped me get introduced to people and activities. Have you heard of the Stephen ministry?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So she was my advocate, and she was a friend. So I wanted help with starting volunteer work. So it's true that the person needs to be the one who takes initiative, because we can't invade privacy. That's true. So you're right.
how'd you get connected to your Stephen minister?
Oh, in the pew at St. Andrew, there was a little rack and there was a little card with all the other prayer cards and everything. And the card said, "Do you need a friend?" So I picked that up and I filled it out, and it was for the Stephen Ministry. And that's how they gave me someone.
That's magic. No, it's beautiful. That's a beautiful connection. A simple lesson. Do you need a friend? Yeah, I do.
Pastor Lutz trained a number of us, and for some of the Stephen ministers, they worked with a number of people, and sometimes it was a short term, sometimes it was longer, but right now the program is kind of dwindled, and it's not mentioned, but there was, like Marcia said, there was a folder in the pews that didn't say, "Do you need a friend?" It just said, "This is a Stevens Ministry program, and if you'd like to be connected, this is what you can do."
Okay. My letter to the therapist, I mentioned what the governor had done back in 2013. And in my book, To Loose the Bonds of Injustice, I go into that, how politicians and other people just closed down all these facilities.
Yeah.
So somehow we need to get legislatures in there to advocate for the disabled and mentally ill. And now that we have the pandemic, everything else is kind of in the background. Shelter House built some additional housing in the Iowa City area. Have you heard of their new buildings? Yes. Yeah, so the people working with the homeless are working on that, and they've established some good places, new places. So,
Carol, did you have a question before? I think you were on mute before, but
I discovered that now. I forget what that was, but one thing I'd like to say is I would love to have Zion consider the housing that we already own. I don't know who lives in it, but we could certainly, I would think, convert that and rent a low-cost housing to people who need that sort of help. So you people who are on the committee will maybe carry it back and talk about it?
If only we knew somebody on the council on the call today.
I know what.
I hear your comment. Yeah.
We've taken up our hour. And I don't know in the Zoom world how to exactly express thanks, like clapping. We could clap.
If you go to reactions along the bottom, that you can clap.
Oh yeah, that's right. There is a reaction, right? So
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Honesty, your sort of ability to sort of confront hard issues, I think, is a real lesson to us. I think particularly how to talk about really hard things, things that are really hard to talk about is a lesson to us all, not only here, but in every sort of phase of our sort of shared life. And for that, Marcia, I think sometimes having skills like you have can both be a blessing and a burden, right? Because in a sense, we're saying, yeah, tell us your innermost thoughts, because you put them beautifully, Marcia. But I can say to you that we're all very thankful and grateful for your time with us and for sharing your insights into this, because it really does really have the capacity to sort of, you've certainly changed how I think about this. And for that, I'm deeply thankful.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.